Um, Thank you guys so much for joining us today. And we just want to just appreciate your participation in this amazing conference. I was surprised, 500 people that were attending, so that's pretty exciting. Um, I wanted to also just mention that my name is Rick Biscocho. I am one of the facilitators with the Cotsen PTN. This session will be interactive and engaging. Just a few housekeeping items. Please stay muted while the presenters are speaking. And then there will be time for interaction during the session and the resources will be shared. You can use the chat to ask questions, and please keep the questions related to the topic. Our session today will focus on social justice. Candice Smith is a program specialist with the LAUSD for the Special Education Division. She's worked as a special day, early education, and resource specialist teacher in South and West Los Angeles with proficiency in balanced literacy and CGI. She's an advocate for all students. Carlen Le-Hessinger is an instructional coach at Yorbita Elementary for the Rowan Unified School District. Her teaching journey includes 4th, 5th, 7th, 8th university adjunct faculty, as well as Cotsen mentor. Her love for all students certainly shows. Both are recent graduates of the Principal Leadership Institute at UCLA to further enhance their drive and passion as social justice leaders to promote inclusive communities. Please welcome Candice Smith and Carlen Le-Hessinger.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Rick, for the introduction.
Thank you.
Yay. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces, as I was saying, and so many new faces to me. So we're going to make some new friends today. And thank you for spending your Saturday morning with us. And
Yes.
great meeting and started an inspiration talk from Dr. Megan Frankie. So I'm Carlen Le-Hessinger, and I'm my partner in crime, Candice Smith, and we're going to be talking to you or presenting to you about how to cultivate authentic text responsive to identities, histories, and literacy. And we opened up this session when you came into this space asking you to share some books that you read when you were a child or in younger years. And it's just nice to see so many familiar texts and texts too that some of us may not be familiar with. But keep that in mind, the books that you've read as a child, and we'll kind of wrap it around and why that's important. So we'd like to start off our session today by offering you a quote to help frame our thinking today around the importance of authentic text for all students, especially those who are marginalized the most. So this quote is by Dr. Radine Sims Bishop. She's well known for her scholarly work in multiculturalism and children's literature. And she wrote an article called Mirrors, Windows, and Sliding Doors, in which she describes the primary purpose of sharing multicultural literature with children. And she writes this: literature transforms human experience, and it reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books. So as you ponder this idea of books as mirrors reflecting our own lives and validating and affirming who we are, think about the books that you read as a child that you shared earlier in the chat box. Did any of these books reflect your lived experiences and cultures growing up? And which ones validated and affirmed your identity? Okay. And as you think about that, think about your students that you work with today. We want to invite you to consider this question throughout our presentation today. What types of books are you cultivating in your classroom that mirror your students' identities, histories, literacies, and cultures? So this will be kind of the ongoing question we want you to ponder and really let it marinate and think about the types of text that you're providing your students in the class and how it reflects your students' identities. I want to share a little bit of data with you that that comes from the the Cooperative Children's Center. And Dr. Sim's idea of books as mirrors is the inspiration behind this data. And it represents the percentage of books written by and about Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we pulled the years 2015, 2018, 2019. And it doesn't take into account the quality and level of authenticity. So the thousands of books that were reviewed by this foundation were based purely on identifying main characters, race, and ethnicity. And as you see here, from 2015, 2018, 2019, there were more children's books featuring white main characters than the Native American, First Nation, Latinx, Asian American, Pacific Islander, Black, African American, and animals and other. You'll also notice that the category animals and other is like the second highest number of books that
Right.
are produced. So if you look across each group, however, from left to right, there has been progress made, but a lot more needs to be done in terms of diversity in children's books, including YA books as well. So clearly, children's literature continues to underrepresent and in many cases misrepresent Black
Right.
and people of color as well. The foundation also recently started looking at books published by US company or publishers, main characters that have disabilities and main characters that are involved in the LGBTQ community. So the percentages are quite low as well. It kind of puts those numbers in perspective in terms of the availability of diverse books out there for our students.
So keeping some of those ideas in mind when we think about our students and our school communities, to truly kind of understand who our students are, we have to know who they are culturally and linguistically. So Dr. Shiraki Holly has studied the ideals of a gentleman by the name of Franz Boas, and he has really distinguished the difference between race and culture. And I think oftentimes we get those two ideas connected together, but let's just really be clear that race is not culture and culture is not race. Our cultural identity is really comprised of the behaviors that we learned, some even when we were born. And those were passed on to us and by those who raised us. And if we take a look at this iceberg, it's divided into three different sections. There's this surface culture, right? So this idea of really understanding and connecting who we are by the foods that we eat and the way in which we speak and the music that we listen to. Those are very surface. Those are things that we can see. And as we get a little bit lower, we kind of come into that shallow culture, right? And so that shallow culture, it's a little under the surface, but it's things that are not as nuanced that we would see typically in how we dance and move in the holidays and different things that we celebrate. And then we get to that deep culture, which is at the bottom. So these cultural behaviors really represent our heritage. And so to respond to our students, we really have to put emphasis, and we should be in those deep cultural behaviors, right? Because they show really the complexity of the culture, and they really highlight all that makes up our students' identities and their histories. And they really help us to know our students in a cultural and a linguistic way and be able to speak to who they are through across content areas, but specifically today we're talking about through literacy. Dr. Howley also does a work and really speaks to this idea of the rings of culture. So once we really begin to kind of recognize and acknowledge all of the different cultures and histories that make up our students, we can begin to really know who they truly are. So I pose the question to you today, what is your makeup? So Dr. Holly uses this concept of the rings of culture, and the rings of culture make up who we are. They're layered identities and cultures. They speak to age, gender, religion, um, ethnicity, class, and age. So these identities, if we look at them in isolation, they say something about who we are and why we enact certain things. So in order for each of us to really respond to those students, again, in our classroom communities and our school communities, it's really critical for us to account for those multiple overlapping identities within your students. So how do we respond to those students? Through understanding who they are with literacy. That's the question that we're continuing to ask of you each today. So we are going to do a little activity. You're going to be put into breakout rooms with a partner, and we're really going to speak to what's in a name. So you're going to be placed in the breakout room for about 5 minutes. And each of you are going to take turns asking and answering the questions that you see here on the slide. So Carlen and I are going to model this for you right now. Okay?
Okay. So Candice, what is your complete name?
My complete name is Candice Allison Smith.
And what is your preferred name?
My preferred name is Candice.
Okay. And who gave you your name?
My mother and father gave me my name. My name, Candice, is a queen in the Bible. And they found that name there when they were coming across. Again, this was in the 70s, a long time ago. But they came across this name in the Bible and they thought it was very fitting.
And how do you experience your name?
It's often misspelled. Oftentimes folks will say, do you go by Candy? Do you like candy? And I'm like, no, I don't. My name's Candice. So I often experience it as something that is misspelled, or it's shortened, or they want to call me by a nickname.
And how do you think others experience your name?
I think others are not necessarily sure, because oftentimes, especially now in the world that we are in, it's a lot of emails and, face-to-face things. And sometimes they don't see me ahead of time. So I don't think that folks are really sure what they are going to get by the name, because it doesn't really speak to anything culturally or any type of diversity or anything like that. So I think it's just very interesting. I don't think they really know what they're going to get when they meet me. So that's it. So that is what you're going to be doing. So you're going to go into your breakout rooms. You're going to take turns asking and answering those questions. I would say just give each other, just kind of like how Carlen and I did, maybe about 2 minutes each. And then we'll come back and then we'll reflect a little bit about that experience. Okay.
So we're going to, with 46, we'll have 23 breakout rooms, Carlen and Candice?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I will assign you guys automatically. We're going to go ahead and create those rooms. And so
Rick, I've got them all ready.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. All right. We'll go ahead and get started on that. Thanks.
We'll see you soon. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. So we just want to pose a question. We know that activity is always like, oh, we wish you had like 1 more minute. But we hope this is something that you will be able to do within your school communities and within your classrooms as well. But we want you to think, just what's one word to describe what that experience was like for you, sharing information about your name. You can go ahead and type that in the chat. Historical, validating, personal, affirming, connecting. Yes, Jen. Amelia said revealing. Rebecca said exciting.
Oh, I love that.
Interpersonal, Karen, yes. Ooh, storytelling.
Oh, met a new friend.
Right, met a new friend. Awesome. Our names can really tell a story, right? And open up a window to other things that examine really who we are about our identity and connection that we make with others. And they really are a lot of, and so many more of these words that you all have described. Thank you everyone for participating in that activity.
Yeah, thank you for being vulnerable in this space. I know sometimes we're not comfortable talking about ourselves.
Yeah.
So, but we hope that you learned something new, just like you did about the person in your group, and perhaps you made a connection with that person based on just the story of their name, history, everything that goes behind it. So, like Candice said, you can do activities like these with your students to get to know your students' identities, their histories, their cultures, and literacies. And if they don't yet know, that's a great place to start to help them
Right.
kind of begin exploring who they are. And when you begin to really get to know who your students are beyond that surface level that Candice mentioned, that iceberg, then you can truly begin to create those spaces that really center and truly mirror who your students are.
Mhm.
And one way that you can do that in creating spaces is to provide culturally authentic text. So students can see their own culture mirrored through the books that they read, as well as learn about people's histories and traditions that differ from their own backgrounds. And so a simple activity like this can be fun and engaging for your students. So we're going to transition a little bit to types of text.
So what type of text is it? So let's talk a little bit about that. So all culturally relevant text is not created equal. So even though you may see images of children or characters with various backgrounds, it's not sufficient to truly know if the text is speaking to our cultures and our students' cultures. And it kind of connects back to that iceberg. It connects back to those rings of cultures. There's so many different layers, right? So those identities and histories, we have to really determine them and figure those things out within our classrooms. So we have to determine the authenticity of the types of text that we're using. So we're going to discuss these three types of culturally responsive text, but we're focusing specifically really on culturally authentic text. So as you see here, there's three different types of text. There's culturally authentic, there's culturally generic, and then there's culturally neutral. So if you look at culturally authentic, we kind of gave you two different examples using some mixed media. So I don't know if any of you have heard of the show Blackish. It's a show that comes on. It's been on ABC. I think Tracy Ellis Ross is one of the lead characters on the show. So culturally, that's a culturally authentic idea of a mass media show, right? And then we look to the other side here on our right, we have the text, The Hate You Give. Culturally authentic text is the preferred type of text for culturally responsive educators. So this text is either fiction or nonfiction, but it really like illuminates the authenticity of experiences of a particular group, whether it's addressed through religion, through socioeconomic status, through gender, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation, or even a geographic location. These specific ideas are considered to be culturally authentic. Then we take a look at culturally generic text. Culturally generic text is a little bit different. So we have this example here of Modern Family. Modern Family is a very diverse family. They have, multicultural family members. And then you have this example here of this book, Corduroy, which was one of my favorite books growing up. The difference between culturally authentic and culturally generic is these texts feature characters of various racial identities, but they contain few or sometimes even superficial details that define the characters or the storylines. So culturally generic text tends to focus on kind of like these mainstream cultural values, but with the use of non-mainstream characters. So you're looking at an example such as this, like Corduroy. So let's look at culturally neutral text. That's our last example, right? Excuse me, my little one is engaged in this conversation as well. So culturally neutral text. These texts feature characters of color, but the stories are kind of drenched in a more traditional or mainstream theme or plot and characterization. These cultural neutral texts are pretty much kind of the least preferred text because they're essentially race-based. They only give an aspect of these texts in the colors of the character's skin. So this example we have here would look at like a movie like Hitch, where we have this Black lead character, but there was really no connection to his culture in the movie. So that's kind of just displays and kind of talks about the differences between the three types of text.
So we're going to kind of like help you see how these three different models come together and how you can use these models to help you begin to look at text to decide whether it's authentic, generic, or even neutral. So the rings of culture, when you look at text, you want to think about what cultures are being represented. Is the text representing uh, age identity or gender identity? Is there a religious aspect of it in there? Is there a class or nationality, orientation, ethnicity? So kind of like this broad general idea of what's being represented in this text. And then once you could identify what types of cultures seem to be represented, you move towards this iceberg where it's a little bit more specific. Within that culture, what are the nuances and behaviors and beliefs that are actually being represented within that culture? And so you want to decide how general it is, which is the surface, or or how specific. That's kind of more the shallow, deeper end of it. And once you can actually put your finger on if there's evidence of it in the text, then you can move to this hierarchy of the type of text, if the text is neutral, generic, or culturally authentic. So I have a sample here of a passage of a picture book, and I'll model for you how you can use this, and then it'll be your turn to try it in small groups, okay? So Benny likes trains that chug along the track. Benny likes to eat seedless grapes for his snack. Benny plays with quiet kids like Miko and Zach, but Benny doesn't like to be hugged. Benny likes cupcakes that aren't covered in sprinkles. Benny likes clothes that don't have any wrinkles. Benny can name the brightest star and he knows why it twinkles. But Benny doesn't like to be hugged. So if I had to do an analysis of this picture book, I wanted to use the rings of cultures as what cultures appear to be represented in this text. I can make an argument, maybe age culture seems like a young little boy, right?
Yeah.
Gender, well, I could maybe argue there's some evidence of gender culture here, how he identifies. I don't get the sense that there's any religious culture in there. And so I'll go through these different rings to see what appears to be represented here. And once I can identify the rings of culture, I'll move into the iceberg and see what elements specifically are represented here that would help me determine the nuances if there's any. So if I look at the surface level of this text, they're talking about Benny, what he likes, food, what he likes to do, what he doesn't like, right? But it doesn't really give me any other indication of perhaps like his belief system, traditions perhaps that might reveal his background. And so I probably want to peg this text as more of a surface level culture um, element. And then that would help me determine in the far right, the hierarchy, that this is identified as culturally neutral. And what makes this culturally neutral is I can take the character Benny out and put anybody else in there, and it would just mean the same thing.
Right.
Okay? So it doesn't really teach me anything about Benny other than what he likes and doesn't like to do. Okay. All right. So now it's going to be your turn. And I want to really preface, like, this takes a lot of practice. It's not like you're going to pick up a book and know right away. It's taken us a long time to do this work. We engage with a lot of text. And so we have to make that a habit, a practice to really keep this in mind as we're reading for authentic text. So we're going to invite you to take a look at this sample text here by a book called Aminas Voice. And we're going to put you in small groups. And I believe in the chat, we're going to give you a bit.ly where
I just posted it.
Thank you, Candice. You're going to have access to this text. And I believe it's like the second sample in there, if you see. And in your group, you can read it together however you're comfortable, and then go through that same thing of looking at what rings of cultures appear to be represented, what elements or evidence of surface level, shallow, or how deep it is, and then kind of decide, okay, what kind of text is it? Is it authentic, generic, or neutral? Okay, so I think we're ready to go. We'll spend about, I don't know, 8 minutes.
Yeah.
Minutes.
Okay,
Okay.
maybe in a breakout room of like 3 or 4 people.
And we'll see you soon. Welcome back.
Welcome back. Okay. So before we move on, we're curious to know how was this process for you in reading this text and having this conversation about the type of text? Can you quickly just put in the chat box? How has this experience been for you? Process.
Yeah, definitely, Sarah.
Sounding very excited.
Yeah.
Diving deeper into
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, Carlen.
Yeah.
It really is, Michelle. It's super challenging and thought-provoking.
Practice.
Yes, for sure.
So our hope is you continue this conversation or bring this back into your own classroom and please do a deep dive in your own classroom library. Bring them to the library to think about what kinds of texts are you providing our students, how authentic, how is it mirroring who they are as students. Um, just a few things to consider. There's many factors to consider, but we thought these were good starting points to think about as you're looking at books. How diverse are the characters represented? Are the characters that come from diverse backgrounds secondary or background characters and not main characters? And how accurate are the descriptions? I read somebody, I read in the chat box somebody put, you have to really do a deep dive in this culture if you're not familiar with it. Really ask the experts if you're not sure. And who are the authors writing this story, right? Whose voices are being validated in these texts? Does the story reflect our school's personal and cultural values? And what are the key narratives um, learned in these texts? So just a few things to consider when you're picking up that book next time and to think about how authentic are these texts and how does it mirror our Candice?
So, as we think about text, we looked and read this article and picked up this quote. And the quote simply says, because when we disrupt text, we can invite students to understand the real power of literature, to provoke questioning, to build understanding, foster empathy, and maybe just maybe make our small piece of the world a little bit better for everyone. So as Carlen was mentioning, it's super important for us to really just think and about those mentor texts. Think about those read alouds. Think about our classroom libraries. In addition to that, think across content areas, not just ELA, not just our reading and writing. Think about our history lessons. Think about our science texts. Think about all these different things that we utilize. Where are our students seeing themselves, their histories, cultures, and identities in those texts? And it's up to us as culturally responsive educators to disrupt those texts so that we can have the outcomes that we want for our students. So we began our time together today with a question, and we kind of want to end our time today together with a question as well, really just for a reflection. We really want to pose this question to each of you to really think about how will you cultivate and utilize culturally authentic texts to validate and affirm all students' identities, histories, and literacies in your classroom. And particularly, we really want to think about those that are most marginalized and most underserved in our school communities and our school classrooms. But we really want to see how we can become more culturally responsive by using culturally authentic text every single day. So where do you start? Today is definitely a starting point. By you even being here today and engaging with us today and having these courageous conversations with new and old friends, that's where we start. In addition to that, Carlen and I have come across some great resources that we utilize in this work every day by some great authors. Dr. Goldie Muhammad talks about cultivating genius, which is a historical response to literacy. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Shiraki Holly, he speaks to culturally and linguistically responsive teaching practices. Being the Change is an amazing book. Carlen has opened my eyes to this author as well too. So this has been great to read her content. Dr. Bettina Love is an amazing author and professor. We Want to Do More Than Survive is an amazing book we've read as well. In addition to that, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain by Zaretta Hammond. Again, this is just a starting place.
And we also compiled places to go on websites that organizations and foundations that have already curated some diverse and authentic text, I would say, too. And it's very specific. So, you know, we encourage you to go through this and see what books you already have in your libraries and perhaps add to it after looking at this. So we've included books or foundations that promote characters of diverse backgrounds. We'll end it there.
Thank you, Candice and Carlen. We know we have about 5 minutes before our time ends. Did you want for the participants to unmute to ask questions, or did you want them to ask in the chat? How did you want to do that?
We want to provide options and access. So whatever they're comfortable with, we are open to all levels of participation and engagement today.
Thank you. So go ahead if you want to just quickly unmute, if you want to ask your question, or you're welcome to put it in the chat and then I can share that out loud. But we have a few minutes before we finish our session.
No questions, it was great. Thank you.
So, yeah, and they said thank you so much for the info and the resources.
The resources are going to be provided to you today. You'll have access to them. So again, like as Carlen mentioned, everything that's in the resources, they're all hyperlinked. So they'll take you directly to those websites or those social media pages. So you'll have access to them as well. Also, the bit.ly link that we dropped in earlier with that activity, that's a good place to start as well too. Like as we mentioned, this doesn't mean to go back to your school sites and rip through all your classroom library. This is just a starting place to be more aware and to really just get you thinking, and even just that collaboration time that you had with your new and old peers today in the breakout sessions. You can do that with your grade levels. You can do that when you're deciding on the mentor text to use for your next genre that you're introducing. So it's really just to think about, what do we already have? What do I need to know? And what else can I do to grow closer to this more culturally responsive educator that I know I am?
Hi, I teach dual immersion. This is my first year with dual immersion, so I'm having a difficult time finding a wide variety of these books accessible or even translated in Spanish. So I'm actually doing a lot of the work myself because there's a lot of amazing options in English.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you have a list of already books that have been translated to Spanish that would lessen a little bit of the workload on my end, because I do want to use a lot of these books within my classroom.
I know that some of the resources that we did provide speak to, other cultures, and they have links to resources that are in other languages. Oftentimes you also may want to go directly to the publisher, because oftentimes the publishers also have those books translated in other languages as well. So that definitely can be an option for you. But we did provide some information as well, but I definitely would also start with the publisher, because they do oftentimes have those books translated in other languages. Carlen, do you have any other suggestions for that?
If you email me, if you contact me, we also have dual immersion in our district, and I know that they also use books that are dual language, and so I can connect you with some resources that we use.
Okay, I got your email down. I will be emailing you. Thank you.
Perfect.
So we have a couple minutes. What I would really love, if you don't mind, Candice and Carlen, if we could stop sharing and then I can do a gallery view picture. So just be sure to, I know we have several people that have, a couple of people that have dropped off. If we don't mind turning on your camera, and then I have it looks like there's a couple of screens. So we're gonna have to put our pearly whites on there, but I'm gonna take a couple of screenshots. Thank you everybody for turning on your cameras. What an amazing session, and we totally appreciate how you guys are just really integrating a lot of things. And so I'm going to take the picture 1, 2, 3. All right, hold on. I have screen 2. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. All right. Well, let's once again thank Candice and Carlen. We can do our, really, really wonderful
Thanks all
silent
of
cheer.
you.
And thank you so much for participating in our session today. We thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope you guys have a wonderful next 2 sessions as we move on to our next thing. Thanks again.
Thank you.